And we saw this in the documentary, how Cuba survived peak oil, that basically they made food for us. So they said you don't have to do this type of chemical, whatever, in a forest. It grows naturally because you have a mixture of different varieties. So up here we have the vine plants. Down here we have the tuber plants. Over here we have creeper plants. We have all these different things mixed together. So there's not only one bug that's going to come wholesale, on your one cotton crop or your one whatever crop it is. So again, and this also maximizes soil cover, so you have lack of erosion. So it provided vegetation as protection from rain erosion, reducing risk of crop failure. Crop cultivation was also done on mounds and ridges to avoid water logging. And we see this as well. And this is a short clip that shows people working together to do this. This guy's good. Look at him flip it. He flips it. Look at that. When he comes back, he's gonna flip it to the side. Now this is the same thing that's done in Martinique, right? So you start playing music and then you do your cultivation. Now in this case, they're not going to plant here; they're going to fight here. But you see a very similar type of method, a very similar type of approach to dealing with this.
It also remind me of a scene from the film The Color Purple. I
Mm.
think we always see that film, where they work on their railroad in completely different circumstances, because these were slaves.
Yeah.
No, they were not slaves, but like
Enslaved
workers.
Africans.
Yeah, but they were, when they were working on the railroad, they were making these rhythms. Very powerful rhythms. It's a beautiful scene, very short, but very powerful. Yeah, reminds me of that.
Right. So you have this concept of work songs and all these things, and again, it comes back as you're thinking about harmony. So harmony can be an abstract concept, or it can be a very literal concept. We're working in harmony together. Literally, we're listening to the music, and we're working in that sense. So again, we have a wide range of African soil and water conservation systems. Stone lines, trash lines, furrows, pitting systems, mounds with green manure worked into the soil, stone terraces, mulching, stands of acacia, albida for nitrogen enrichment. You also have indigenous engineering techniques, terracing of mountain slopes. So you have a 2,000-year-old terracing system in Mandara Mountains of Cameroon. So again, you have African people just doing what makes sense. I need to make sure my descendants have something to eat. So once you have that as your overarching impetus or your goal, then you need to do things to make that happen. And the fact that we as African people are still alive and we're the very first people on the planet, it lets you know that yes, we were doing things that were useful for that. Nowadays, we're abandoning it to quote unquote develop. You have a spectacular example of indigenous terracing in Jebel Mara in Sudan as well. So you can find this in various places. So you have mountain regions in Africa as a safe haven for peoples under threat from hostile groups and nations. You find this, the Dogon in Mali, who, according to oral tradition, trace their coming to the Dogon escarpment and cliffs to the Almoravid and Almohad invasions, that they were trying to get away from that. So when you have that situation, now you have to be in mountains. Well, how are you still going to cultivate? How are you going to make sure your children have something to eat? And they have a very elaborate system where they talk about the various grains that they preserve, the granaries that they preserve it in. So when you are saving seeds, what you're doing is basically ancestor veneration, and by the same token, descendant veneration, because they are one and the same. So this required intensive farming on limited land resources on steep terrain. There's a requirement for terrace systems to conserve soil and water. So-called ethno-engineering on par with ethno-philosophy. So they never say, oh, they're using just engineering. They say, no, this is ethno-engineering. So it's basically a way of saying, oh, it's not really engineering because it's done by African people. wait till white people come and do it now is real engineering, right? So, yeah, ethno, ethnobotany, ethno music, ethno whatever. But and again, this is the very racist terms that they use in order to get around saying African people invented engineering. So if you want to talk about ethno, well, let's talk about your ethnicity. Are you Briton? Are you Welsh? Are you Dutch? Are you what ethnicity are you? But they don't apply that ethno to their own ethnicities, only to the African ones. But we know what's going on. They're doing this for self-preservation. So despite proven usefulness, indigenous systems are relegated by Eurasians to a status of primitive or rudimentary methods, even when they're more effective than the methods that they have either developed or co-opted from others. So when Africans follow Eurasians in this view, this has led to a collapse, non-maintenance, and ignorance of indigenous systems. So again, the man who stopped the desert, he's talking about let's re-implement a system that many had, some, especially youth, had never even heard of it before, right? In the documentary we saw, Taking Root by Wangari Maathai, she was talking about a time that she was able to see where you had all of these forests, you had these streams, the tree that was seen as sacred and divine, but you know, when it's cut down, the British are saying all of this is going to be a monocrop tea culture. So you're planting tea all the way to your door. So what happens to the children who are born into this tea system? They've never even seen anything else. They've never seen, well, how are you doing it before? How are you doing such and such? All they know is just throw chemicals on it and then sell it off to Britain or wherever. So failed modern Eurasian conservation systems were superimposed on top of empirically proven through longitudinal studies of thousands of years indigenous systems which were dismissed as being of no value. So when we talk about science, you understand we talk sometimes about science experiments. When you are discussing African culture, what you're talking is a longitudinal scientific study that when we do this in this way for 1 generation, 2 generations, 20 generations, 50 generations, what is the end result? Well, the people who have done it for 50 generations are the ones who can answer, this is the end result of our science experiment, right? If you're just coming up, let's try this, let's try this, let's try this, you don't know in a long run what it's going to do to you. So you've introduced these chemicals. Is this going to have an impact on cancer? Is this going to have an impact on birth rates? If you look up this chemical called Nemagon, Nemagon, in Central America and South America, this was something that they would put spray in banana plantations, and they would spray it and it did well for the bananas in terms of its growing, blah, 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 but it caused numerous birth defects. If you see the children that were born after their parents had been working in the places where they were spraying Nemagon, the children look literally like aliens, right? Where the heads are tiny, the bodies have limbs coming out of the backs, have limbs, one leg, all types of deformations that are just like unreal. So again, you're talking about science, or we use science to make this chemical, but you don't even know what happens within 1 generation, much less 10 generations down the line from you using this, right? So many places this Nemagon has been banned, but other places, don't say anything. We just have these poor workers, just give it to them, and now we get our bananas. And some of the major corporations such as Del Monte, Dole, so forth and so on, Chiquita, were implicated in using this Nemagon and having this impact in terms of birth defects. So colonial land policy in Kenya and alienation from the land. Colonialism was seen as a force to break the sacred bond between the African and his or her land. And basically they use various techniques to get you to have to come into the money economy, right? So after we repossess your fallow land, now you have to pay me to use it. Well, I don't have any money. Well, that means you need to work in the mines. That means you need to work on the railroads. That means you need to work here, there, and so forth. So the dissociation led to other schisms or crises in African identity. So a dissociation of human beings from nature is parallel to the dissociation of the spiritual aspect of African culture from the material aspect when they're actually intertwined. So in the Berlin Conference 1884 to 1885, it separated African people by arbitrary boundaries, And again, we have a discussion of schizophrenia as multiple cells not working in tandem. And we also had Aikoyama's discussion of division as equaling disease. So imagine if my right side of my brain isn't working with my left side of the brain. There's some type of problem that's going to come out because of that. Well, now let's take it on to the scale of the continent or all lands of black people wherever we are, that if they're not working together, it's the same as in a body. Let's say, for example, here I am and someone wants to attack me. Now my right hand is not willing to do anything about it because that's my left hand's problem. So now they're always knocking me on here because my right hand isn't willing to come up and assist me. I say, come on, right hand, this affects you too. No, I'll wait for it to actually hit my hand. If someone did that, you would say this person is stupid. But this is the exact situation that we have. As black people, we have different parts not coming or working together in tandem for the benefit of African people for self-preservation. So in this, boundaries are seen as a cause of strife and tension, arbitrary boundaries as well as upside down Africa that we've discussed before. So with cutting up Africa into these boundaries, we have a definition that relates to this, where from Dr. Wade Nobles, he says, power is the ability to define reality, then other people respond to your definition as if it were their own. So they've said there's a proverb that a cow grazes where it is tied. Now, if you ask people, are you a cow? Most will say no. But are you still responding to the boundaries that were set at the Berlin Conference? Then they will say yes. So then you ask fundamentally, what's the difference? We've discussed this before of the concept of Africa west on the right and east on your left, upper in the south and lower in the north, right? So this was our concept, but how many see this map and say, oh yes, this is what I'm used to. You see it and say, oh, why is Africa upside down? Matter of fact, I did some flyers for Capoeira and I had Africa right side up like this. And one of my students, he said, oh, I gave it out to people and they were very disturbed. They were like, oh, why is Africa upside down? Why is Africa upside down? He said it really troubled them, it really disturbed them. So when Africa is depicted as the very first map was as your own African ancestors conceived of it, now it's something to kick against, as opposed to let's restore it to our own view of how the world was and is, right? And this is Africa shown around 1268 Common Era along the lines of the indigenous ethnic groups, wherever they were at that time.
We don't know what is up and below, and we don't know that because the earth is round. And we don't even know what is, what is the real map? I wonder if we can actually make a real map. I get your point. A lot of people have talked about people like Jane. What's her name again? This woman who showed the Western world map and how the Western countries were portrayed, especially the US was portrayed very big, and then all the other countries
That's
were
the Mercator map.
very small. So people have talked about, have criticized that Western map, but I want to raise also another question, like what is the real map? Even if we look at the globe, even if we make a round map like the globe, what is the up? What is the up and the down? Maybe we can, if you look at how the sun comes up, and maybe that's a point to, maybe that's an angle that can give us, is there a real map, or maybe there isn't, I don't know.
So the question is, let's go back to the very first map that was ever made, and what was the orientation of that map? So the very first map, that is what's called the Turin Papyrus map, which was made by a scribe named Amennacht, the son of Ipui. So we're talking around over 3,000 years ago. So in this, if we want to know what a map is, what a map should look like, what orientation should we have for the map, we can go to, okay, one option is to say, let's go back to what those maps were at that time. What was their orientation? Was it east on the left? Was it west on the right? Was it south at the top? Was it north at the bottom? So that's where you get your orientation from. And then you also ask yourself,
why that orientation?
So I'm saying,
Yeah.
if you have a map, you're asking which way is it going to be. Now, south and north, this it's not arbitrary that maps are originally south up and then arbitrary that now they are north up. That it's coming from the Earth spins on an axis,
Mhm.
right? So based on the axis, you have one pole here, you have another pole here. Now, which pole you want to see as up, it's
Mhm.
not that, oh, we're just changing the poles and flipping the Earth. It's which one do you see as being on the top,
Mhm.
right? And all of this comes to the point about where the sun rises and sets, that here you have the equator, which is as close as the Earth gets to the
Mhm.
sun. So none of these things are arbitrary things, the poles and the sun, but now it comes down to how are you choosing to see it and why. Now what you brought up is the Mercator projection of the map, and that's the one that has everything out of shape and so forth and so on. And you have, matter of fact, I saw a couple weeks ago a movement to bring in the Peters, Gall-Peters projection map, which shows things much more on the scale of as they actually are. Now, again, you're asking yourself, all right, if you want to know how maps are done, let's see how maps were done. If you want to say, which way is up, which way is down, which pole should we recognize as up, which pole should we see as down, how were maps done and why? You understand?
Yeah, especially that last one. Yeah,
Mhm.
based on what? Based on, yeah.
But these are the three major
Mhm.
considerations,
The poles
the
and
poles
yeah.
and then the
This-
equator,
Yeah.
right?
yeah.
So from a certain conception, you can see the equator as being the um, center point
Mhm.
for obvious reasons. And then also, when you look at how things were conceived of in Kemet as the place where the sun rises on the left and the place that the sun sets on the right, that's in relationship to the equator, right? So I'm north of the equator. That means when I'm looking at where the sun rises, it's looking like it's coming up on the left and then going down on the right. Now you come to the Bakongo people, they're south of the equator. So when they show the Dikenga, it's in what we call a counterclockwise fashion, because for them, when they're looking at the equator, what they call the elliptical, they're looking at where the sun rises is coming up for them on the east, which is now on their right, and then it's setting in the west, which is now on their left. So again, you're looking at where are you in relationship to this center line, which is as close as the Earth gets to the sun. But again, it's a ball, but it's not a sphere ball in the sense of it's flipping and doing all types of stuff. It's going to be either this one, as
Yeah.
you see it.
And
So
it's- yeah.
exactly. So
Yeah.
now it's a question of how is my camera going to be placed in relationship to this thing that keeps going like this? Is my camera going to be right side up as it's going, or am I going to flip my camera upside down? The Earth is still doing what it's doing, but the question is my camera right side up or upside down with relationship to these poles? And then you ask yourself, why did they decide to flip the camera upside down? Originally, we put it right side up. They said, we don't like it like that. We want Europe to be on top. We want Europe to be in the center. We want it to be bigger than everything else. Why? Right? So we continue. So again, we're coming down to boundaries that we have are not natural. Many Africans as well are nomadic pastoral rather than sedentary agricultural. And I was looking at a news story talking about people in southern Africa who I know as the Khoikhoi and the San, and they would go hunting and they would cross between, I want to say, Namibia and Angola, that area. But they were traveling and they got stuck in one side, stuck in the sense that the people at the border wouldn't let them cross back. So they're like, we've been doing this for the last how many thousand years. Now you're saying that here's a border, you can't get back to where you were. So it's a major problem. So, when we're talking about boundaries, what are we even dealing with here? Same language group split into two or more. So you have this for the Yoruba, for Hausa, Fulani across various nation states. And we can go on and on. You have Akan speakers in Ghana. You have some in Cote d'Ivoire. You have Wolof speakers in Senegal. You have some in Gambia. You have Mande speakers all throughout West Africa. So what are you basing this division on? Even if you want to say, let's go to an ethnic-based type of thing, you have ethnicities that cut across all these Berlin Conference boundaries. Modern states have retained present colonial boundaries. Unification of these states would allow artificial boundaries to be swallowed and eradicated, which has been advocated for by some. The colonial land policy was vehemently resisted and eventually defeated in Africa, causing it to transform into a neo-colonial land policy. And we had a lecture from Prof. Amono, which actually dealt with some of this neo-colonial land policy. Particularly where acquisition of land for farming or mining was done by the settler colonialists, the settler whites in Zimbabwe, Zambia, Malawi, Kenya, and so forth and so on. So they were able to get rid of the colonial policy, but now they have a neo-colonial policy, which often comes with the same thing, monocrop agriculture, using what would have been used for agriculture for mining, so forth and so on. The Kikuyu, according to Kenyatta, as agriculturists, the Kikuyu people depend entirely on the land. It supplies them with the material needs of life through which spiritual and mental contentment is achieved. Communion with the ancestral spirits is perpetuated through contact with the soil in which the ancestors of the tribe lie buried. The Kikuyu consider the earth as the mother of the tribe. Thus, the earth is the most sacred thing above all that dwells in or on it. Among the Kikuyu, the soil is especially honored, and an everlasting oath is to swear by the earth, which is what they did in the Kenya Land and Freedom Army. That they would swear an oath that if they don't do this or if they do this, may the oath kill them. So we find that the British met severe resistance in Kenya. The British land policy was in opposition to shifting cultivation methods, including leaving land fallow for regeneration of vegetation. The British left users with land cultivating at the time while stealing surrounding fallow land and the user's custodianship. So here you're only cultivating this right now. You've left all this around fallow. The British say, here's my flag, you don't have it. So now at the end of this season, you're trying to go here, and then they come with machine guns and say, guess what, that's ours now. So what do? So when users moved in the course of shifting cultivation, they had to pay rent as squatters on their own land. And this was hustling people into white Eurasian monetary economy. So they also racially segregated the land in Kenya. In the 1900s, Europeans were given extensive land grants from the British Crown of land already inhabited by Africans. This affected the Maasai, Kikuyu, and Kalenjin people. Note the use of peoples rather than people. There's a notion of blindfolded resistance. We also had a documentary, Stealing a Nation, where the British stole the land of Diego Garcia in the Chagos Islands. In this, there's a quote from Ambassador O of United Front where he says, treated like a thief on stolen land, a descendant of stolen woman and stolen man. So meanwhile, while they're stealing all this African land, now they criminalize black people and say all of you are naturally thieves on land that you stole from the people. They're saying, oh, all black people are criminals on land that you stole with people that you stole. That's a problem. So the 1915 Crown Lands Ordinance formalized racial segregation of lands in Kenya. It barred Africans and Asians from so-called white highlands, the most fertile lands in the country. By 1922, 11,000 square miles of land had been stolen from the African population. So 2,000 settler farmers employed 90,000 African laborers. The hut and poll taxes were to force the agricultural population into wage labor. So whereas if they were connected to the land and could provide their own food, they would be independent from the British Eurasians. They say, we'll take away your self-sufficiency, we'll take away your land. Now you have to depend on us for a job, which is a situation that we're still in to this day. So we see this also in terms of poll taxes in the United States and other places used to disenfranchise black or African voters. In the 1920s, the Kikuyu Central Association became the Kenya African Union. In 1929, Jomo Kenyatta went to England as the KCA, Kikuyu Central Association representative. By the late 1940s, because of falling wages, continued theft of African land, dismissal of even their moderate claims for political representation, this led to the Kenya Land and Freedom Army, referred to by the British under the term Mau Mau. By 1947 to 51, the 40 age grade built a network of freedom fighters throughout the land of the Central Province and the Rift Valley, demanding return of stolen land and independent African government. Now, this goes back to our ongoing discussion about preservation versus theft, that we could say that they're preserving the land for us because we're not taking care of it well, or we could look at it for what it is, that they stole the land and the people themselves said, we don't like you stealing our things, we're going to do something about it, right? So the Kenya African Union, so 1952, the British declared a state of emergency where they flew in troops to crush the rebellion. All major nationalist leaders were detained. By April 1954, they had Operation Anvil, screening of the entire Kikuyu population and removal of 24,000 Kenyans to detention camps. At this time, this also comes into the land. They would burn forests wholesale. This was also discussed in the documentary, where the Kenya Land and Freedom Army, they were hiding in the forest. So the British had just bombed the forest, burned it all. And this is what they do. It's not our land, this is black people's land. We wouldn't do this in Britain, but who cares? Let's just burn it all. And this has now had a major impact. So what Wangari Maathai was doing was trying to counteract the quote unquote, what we could call preservation that they were doing by destroying our lands. So by 1956, the armed land and freedom movement, the so-called Mau Mau Rebellion, was defeated, and Dedan Kimathi, the leader, was captured and executed. We come back. So the Kenya African Union was formed in 1960. Kenyatta was released in 1961 and won the elections. Kenya's flag independence was in 1963, but in many ways is still subservient to former colonial governments, as are many of the flag independent states. So in this, we see that the earth is seen as a guiding principle in spiritual, social, political, and economic organization. So we're talking about spirituality, we're talking about, from an indigenous African concept, some type of connection to the land. You have a historical situation of Kenya, and it illustrates a spiritual and material connection between the human community and the earth and Africa. This was undone in many ways, by and large, through colonization and European theft of African lands. Now, recently on a Bibi to Mikasa, I was looking at an article of a woman who went to school, I want to say in the US, UK, somewhere, but then decided to come back to Kenya to engage in watermelon farming. So this is something that would be seen as, oh, I've gone to school, I get my shirt and tie, whatever.
You should be a millionaire.
Exactly.
I've seen the article. Yeah.
Exactly. So this is something that, you know, people are now trying to make this connection back to the earth, because a lot of our training tells us to stay completely divorced from it. But again, we're seeing some inroads. We see Wangari Maathai, who has made inroads also in Kenya, or who did make inroads in Kenya as well, and others. We looked at another documentary, Mully, who has the Mully Children's Family, where they also have planted many trees and even created micro ecosystems where they were able to change the climate on small scales in the places that they were able to plant millions of trees. So again, we have alienation from the land, however, continues for many African people. And this is what we're taught in the schools and other places. Very few people, if we say here at University of Ghana at Legon, we'll give all of you students a plot of land for you to work so you can put yourself through school. I don't know how many would take that up, because the idea is Kratia Juma, which is dignified work, to work in an office. Now, a friend of mine, he's a photographer, and he was part of this, I don't know what to call it, let's say a project, where it was to show people doing good jobs. So some people went to this air-conditioned office and took the big man sitting on his chair with a big fat belly. They took a picture of that. That's a good job. Other people, you know, they went to a radio station. They said, good, that's a good job. He had a different idea. So he went to people who were digging ditches, right? And took all types of photographs and brought it back to them. He said, look, this is my idea of a good job. They said, this is never a good job. He was saying that, look at these people, they're strong physically. Look, they're able to be in the sun. They're getting, you know, their melanin dosage is up. all these things. The people who are in these offices, under the air conditioned sofa, they end up having all types of heart diseases, strokes, so forth and so on. These people who are working, these people who are breathing, these people who are out in nature and the environment, connected to the soil, that they're good. They rejected his photos. I said, no, this is not what we mean. Go take pictures of people in an office. We need to spell it out for you. Go take pictures of people in an office. So again, this is what we're trained to think of a good job as being, right? Now, I have another colleague who says, yes, I'm a professor at University of Ghana, but I'm a farmer too. So guess what? On weekends, I'm going off to tend my farm, right? So this is another way of looking at this as well. We also have a small plot in Obosomase, and we were able to get some plantain from it. We were able to get some bofre from it, and it's still coming up now. So some of us have a different view of how we should be operating. Just because you are in academia or whatever, doesn't mean that you shouldn't be able to provide for your own family. So again, here we see in the 21st century, we're apt for traditional ways of relating to the earth and the land. There's a needed balance with the ecosystem due to transcendental oneness of law, land, human community. Otherwise, the global economy is unsustainable. And this is even from those who are part of it. They say, we can't keep doing this. We can't keep taking out all the soil, all of this oil, all of this timber. Eventually, you're not going to have trees to chop down, and we've seen this in various places. Capitalism has a tendency towards overexploitation of the earth's resources, and there are serious consequences for this. Human economy must be in harmony with earth and the ecosystem. All the things that are upside down must be turned right side up. So as we're talking about, our concept of the earth is upside down. This literally in terms of the map, but also figuratively in terms of how we see all of these various things, right? We protect things that we should be attacking. We run away from things that we should be running towards. We run towards the things that we should be running away from. So all of these things that we're doing are actually very much our extended metaphor of things being in an upside down state as they are. Disregard of the earth, the supreme mother divinity, invites retribution in the forms of heat waves, earthquakes, and floods. Now, there's an article, I think I mentioned this before, that by 2050, it's expected that parts of Africa and southwestern Eurasia, the so-called Middle East, are expected to be uninhabitable by 2050, less than 50 years from now. So again, when you're seeing all this human activity, human behavior, so forth and so on, also you've had a melting of polar ice caps. So you can look at pictures of polar bears walking around in what looks like a meadow. It's like, what are you doing here? Right? You have penguins who, all of their natural environment is basically, eroding before their very eyes. And this is what we're seeing. So again, what is sometimes dismissed as, oh, that's just, mythology, that if you do this, that the earth will do something to you. No, it's talking about cause and effect. It's talking about physics. It's talking about when you do this action, naturally, this action will take place. Now, another side of this is that generally we're talking about the so-called white people, those who refer to themselves as white, who are generally the main factors to all of these changes that we're seeing. Now, when we're seeing that the sun or the heat of the sun is going to make some of these places uninhabitable, what we can expect is that a lot of people are going to be getting a lot darker, right? So, sometimes, yeah. So, sometimes we worry that, oh, well, they have nuclear weapons and so forth and so on, that what we're looking at is the unleashing of the very biggest nuclear weapon in our solar system, which is the sun, right? That's our nuclear weapon. So again, all of these things are going back towards balance. So if something in your whiteness or whatever has caused you to do all these things to destroy the environment, things have to come back into balance. So as the sun's energy is going to come bigger, then we're going to take away this whiteness that made you do these things in the first place. So again, we're looking at naturally things are coming back. They have to come back towards Ma'at, and we have to come to, are we going to play a role in that, or are we going to stand aloof from that?
Or are we going to survive?
Or are you even going to survive it in the form that you're in right now? but remember that things are not necessarily created or destroyed, they only transform. So you may not still be in the same form of Lisbeth, our nice friend here.
Yeah, sure,
But
I mean, I'm pretty sure human species will die out. I mean,
that's very possible. And
so-
then something else will take the place.
Yeah, sure, and dying itself, I mean, it can have many forms, but, you know,
Hmm.
if things are changing, especially, usually things are changed by crisis,
Hmm.
it is not very pleasant to be in the middle of it.
Yeah, it's not. So, we understand that all these things change. Death is changed. All these things have changed. But now we have to ask ourselves, under what conditions do we want that change to be? Now, early on, I don't know if you all were here for this. We looked at the video by Dr. Charles Finch where he talked about the precession of the equinoxes. You were here for that? So in that, he's talking about in every single age you had some type of correlation on the earth. So, you go back, this is the age of Pisces. Here you have the so-called Christian era, overrunning of the planet by these Eurasians. That's what we've seen. Before that, you had the age of the Ram. So that's where you had Waset, which was represented by Amun, also associated with the Ram. That was a major, figure. Even before that, you had Khnum, that's still represented by a ram, so forth and so on. Now, before that, you had the age of the bull. And at that point in time, you had the main centers of power at Min Nefer, so-called Memphis, and Unu, that's Heliopolis. So you had representatives of the Apis bull, Hapu. All of these things are associated with the bull. So when you're in the age of the bull, everything on the ground is centered around the bull. Before that, you had the age of the twins. So that's where you had the two lands. So everything up there is telling you what's going on down here and vice versa. So as we're going into this next phase, we're talking about this is the age of Menat, the water bringer, also known as Hapi, right? The inundation of the Nile. So this could take various forms. It could be that all these cities that are on the coastline, all of that ice that's melting is going to put all of you underwater. We're expecting something to have something to do with water in this age that we're coming up in. Now, we could say it could be something different. If we did things differently, that water doesn't have to take the form of we're all getting flooded, all these people are dying, so forth and so on. It could be, look at all these underwater aquifers under the Sahara, let's harness that. Now we're still harnessing this water energy, we're still harnessing this water power, but it doesn't necessarily have to take the form of destruction. But again, it's coming back to cause and effect. If you do things that destroy certain things, then the water is going to come in a very destructive way. If you're doing things that are beneficial, then this water age could come in a very creative, regenerative way, right? So again, it comes down to what is your role in it? Are you even going to survive it? All these things. But again, this is where we're talking about that the earth operates in accordance with the ancient African principle of natural law, Ma'at, also referred to in modern times as physics and other things. This guides the ritual cooling or propitiation of the earth. Now in Yoruba, when they do libations, they say Ile Tutu, which is the cool earth. So they say Ile Tutu, Ori Tutu, cool head, Ile Tutu, Ona Tutu. So cool house, cool road. So they say all these things, Tutu Laroye, which is coolness, and Laroye, which is in communications, and that's referring to Eshu as Alaroye, the owner of these communications. So when we're saying these things, we're asking for these things to stay cool, because when you say Ile Bono, you're saying that the land is hot. It's like how black people in the States, they say the block is hot, that means things are not going well, or in Chi, you say Masoyashi, that my ears have heated up, my ears have become hot. It means that things are not in a cool, peaceful state anymore. But eventually, there's a proverb in Chile, they say, "Ehurua, ebejo," that even if it boils, eventually it will cool down. You may not be here to see it, but eventually things are going to come back to a state of balance. You can be part of that balance, or you can say, I'm cool with the status quo of the things that have taken us out of balance. The divine feminine nature principle of Ma'at and Kemet, you find this also in the form of the earth in traditional Africa, around which social, spiritual, political, and economic activity is organized. And this is seen as a sound basis for national development. And you can see this with regard to Job's cultural unity of Black Africa, also his idea of a plan of harnessing Africa's resources. Now, when I think about this as well, we can look at Nut, we can look at Shu, Tef, Nut, and Geb, right? So Shu is oftentimes associated with the wind, Tefnut associated with moisture, Nut associated with celestial phenomena, including the sun, stars, so forth and so on, and Geb associated with the earth. Now, if we're looking at energy, we're looking at power, we're looking at all these things, we could look at them, categorizing them as our ancestors in Kemet saw them as well. So when we're talking about we need wind power, you're talking about Shu. You're harnessing Shu, that wind power, in order to do what you need, right? So when they're talking about sustainable energy, so forth and so on, it's nothing but looking at those first four that Atum created. When you're talking about Tefnut, you're talking about water power. So that could be at the form. I have a colleague who works at the he works with rather the University of West Indies, Barbados, other places, in terms of this deep sea turbine technology, and basically looking at the currents of the ocean, and they turn this turbine. Now, as they turn this turbine, naturally, as they'll do, because it's this energy that keeps pushing these turbines, that it creates energy, electric. Yeah, I guess that's the word I'm looking for. This electric. Say again?
The word magnetic.
Not magnetic. It creates electricity. That's what I'm looking for. And one of the byproducts of this process is fresh drinking water. So you have this thing that now we're looking at Tefnut, you're talking about moisture, using this power of moisture in order to fulfill your energy needs. And again, not looking at this carbon-based, let's destroy the environment type of thing, but looking at now we've harnessed the air, now let's also harness the water in this sustainable way. When you're talking about Nut, you're talking about celestial phenomena, including the sun. So now you're talking about solar energy. When you're talking about Geb, there are also those who are looking at the deeper you go into the earth, the hotter it gets. So there are those who are looking at harnessing this deep earth heat in order to produce energy as well. So if we want to think about ways in which we can move forward as African people for development, sometimes we can look at this as a mirror. We're looking into the past in order to see into the future, right? So again, we can look at ancient Kemet as well as a model in that sense. It's not always just, oh, it's so spooky, blah, blah. It's also, at the same time, very practical, right? We're giving you the various elements. How can you harness them in order to do things instead of destroying your environment to do them? We continue. So in this, we have the feminine divine nature principle as a secular principle of organization, basic to organization in antiquity of matriarchal societies. And this is interesting when we talk about matriarchal and matrilineal societies. Saddam, I'm looking at you again.
Okay.
This one is easy, or should be. Has. You know this? Try to pronounce that. Okay. Those who speak English usually say this as Aset, right? Aset being whom? The Greeks referred to her as Isis, right? And you notice that she's represented by the throne, and through the matrilineage, through the female line, is what gives you legitimacy to rule or to do anything else. So if you want this title, if you want whatever, it's based on who is your mother, you know, related to. So basically the idea that, and she's often depicted with this throne on her head, so she is the foundation by which anyone else can get anything in terms of rulership, so forth and so on. So again, of course, a feminine principle. So when we're talking about this, we're talking about this in antiquity. This is fundamental to matriarchal and matrilineal societies, because it comes down to something that's very practical, which is what we know is who your mother is. Only the mother knows who the father is. So if you're going to try to do things through patrilineal, it may require some degree of guesswork, because you hope that that's what the lineage is, but the one that you are truly sure of is you know what womb you came out of. That one can't get past anyone. Also, universal so-called animism and matriarchy characteristic of earth-based societies. Veneration of the earth deity or divinity commensurate with matriarchal society. And we saw this in our discussion of Geb and Nut and Kemet as well. And originally naming after the mother's brother, but a transition to patrilineal with the rise of Eurasian worship systems. So you find various African people, and this is what Cheikh Anta Diop deals with in Cultural Unity of Black Africa, where he deals with this original concept of things being matrilineal, but over time, even here in Africa, things shifting to a patrilineal type of system, especially as people become more Muslims, Christians, so forth and so on. That part and parcel of that comes with a devaluing of the feminine and an overvaluing of the masculine, as opposed to this complementary opposites type of concept that we need both in order to be complete. There's also a transition from matriarchy to patriarchy in conjunction with the worship of a male god and a device of female goddess veneration. Again, loss of complementarity in favor of diametric opposites, constants over propriety. So when you have a religion such as Islam, all the so-called Western religions, they say one thing has to be good, its opposite has to be evil. So therefore, God has to be a male, because males are good. The one who causes your fall has to be a female, because females are the opposite of male, and so forth and so on. So again, you also have this idea of continuous revelation versus discontinuous revelation. So when you're talking about a Bible or a Torah or a Quran, it's saying that what's here in this book, that's it, nothing else, as opposed to the African concept, which is anytime I get possessed, this is a connection to the divine, and I'm going to be revealing information to you about your past, about your future. So divination also forms part and parcel of this view of the world, that revelation, just like creation, isn't something that happened way back then and that's it. It's something that's going on every single day. Every time a man and a woman come together and have a child, guess what? That's creation too, right? Anytime we get possessed or do a divination, oh, this is telling you that in the future so-and-so, that's continuous revelation. And that was seen as being one of the most important things to uproot by the Eurasians. There's actually an article that I am pretty much done with that goes into how they attempted to root out this idea of continuous revelation, to say the Bible, that's it. Nothing else is allowed after that. Because they were still saying, oh, but no, we still have prophets. We have this, we have that. Like, no, if you do that, we're going to kill you. So again, it's very necessary for them to give you this type of concept. Again, the Aryan invasion marked the demise in Mesopotamia and India of these pre-existing things. Now, there are some who take umbrage with the idea of invasion. Some say it's a much slower process of this. Epic of Gilgamesh, mythical representation of the demise of the goddess Ishtar from 2000 BCE. In Igbo mythology, the status of Idemili usurped by her husband, the hunter Aho. And we also saw that when these Eurasians were writing down the story of creation, they changed the male and female complements to two kings, right? So even if you want to say, oh, let me go back to my indigenous understanding, if you're reading it from a book from someone who is preserving it but doesn't have your interests at heart, guess what? You're not going to get it there either. It's all written in Igbo, it's all supposedly yours, but it's being filtered through someone who is not necessarily doing a good job at that, because they're interested in their own self-preservation and not yours. So ontological stories regarding the origin of male dominance in the place of female and male complementarity can be understood in conjunction with the beginning of the ending. So the transition to patriarchy and separation of humans from nature, that those are seen as being different sides of the same coin. The distancing of humans from the supreme being, male, female, and the transfer of power from women to men signified by transfer of control of society of mass. You have in various African cultures now, they talk about, in the beginning, women, controlled the mass, but they became abusive with their power, or they overdid something, whatever the case is, and therefore, it's now in the hands of men. But basically, what you're seeing is a transition from this idea of complementarity to what you find now, and there have been various things that have caused that transfer to come along that we've just articulated. Again, transition from matriarchy to patriarchy traces historical origins of modern person's alienation from nature. Today takes the form of psychological and physical separation from the earth. This is characteristic of industrial societies, that the individual is out of contact with the earth physically and conceptually. A consequence of the industrial age, the earth is not seen by the average person as the immediate means of sustenance. Now, I remember I did this myself, but I've seen other people who've done this as well, that I taught in Chicago. And you ask people, I think we were teaching about the word ngombe, the word for cow, and we were asking them, where does beef come from? They said it comes from a store. So they're eating beef. They're like, where does it come from? And it goes back to what we're talking about, the Kwele people being wise is knowing the process. How do these things come to you? Like, it comes from a store. It's in a cellophane wrapper. You just tie it up, boom, boom. You go to the store, you pay for it. That's it. And they had no relationship, no concept of there's a relationship between a cow and this thing that they're eating, right? And there's another documentary. What was it? It was on, I forget the name of it, but it was also on the livestock industry, specifically dealing with beef industry and how it is the number one contributor to greenhouse gases, emissions, so forth and so on. But anyway, the guy who was doing the documentary, he had been eating all these, all this beef all his life, eating hamburgers, blah, blah, blah. But now he's coming and says, okay, if I'm going to do this, I need to go and kill this. And I think he tries a chicken first. I need to go and be able to kill this chicken. If I'm going to eat a chicken, I need to kill a chicken. He can't even stomach it. He's like, oh no, but it's gonna die. No. So there's a complete alienation from this thing I'm putting in my mouth comes from this animal that's walking around. So again, there's this disconnect between this earth is where I'm getting my food from. Usually this market is where I'm getting my food from. Wherever it comes from before that, I don't know.
Yeah, it reminds me of an art piece of a visual artist. I made a portrait of her, and she did an art piece. She took a pig in her house for like 2 or 3 weeks or something like that. And then after she got attached to the pig as her house animal, as a pet, she she took the pig to a butcher to kill the pig and then to eat it. And then she filmed everything. So she filmed the pig coming in the house and her getting attached to it, but also taking the pig to the butcher and then afterwards eating it. So, and then what does she feel? It was a way for her to see if she could, in some way to connect the disconnection of what it is that we're taking in, and are we having any kind of relationship with it. And it was a very interesting piece and also very controversial because of the fact that everybody was like, how can you kill the pig when it's been in your house? And she was like, but we're doing it all
every day.
Yes, we're buying meat every day. So how come this pig is different than but so it's really interesting. Interesting art piece.
Yeah, and also I appreciate you sharing that. This came up a couple things. I have one of my tree students named Abena. She said that when she was a child, she got attached to a goat, gave it a name. This is here in Africa, so she was born in the States. She came back, I guess, for a summer or whatever. So she got attached to a goat. She gave it a name. This is her best friend, blah, blah. Don't get attached to animals here in Africa. And you can guess what the ending was, that, one day she comes from, school, whatever, she's eating the food, fufu, whatever. And she goes like, oh, where's my goat? You just ate your young. So she says that this was such a traumatic experience for her, whatever.
I can imagine.
And then also where it comes to animal sacrifice, especially in the African context, where, oh, that's barbaric, that's blah, 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 so forth and so on. But then McDonald's sacrifices millions and millions. What does it have? Over however many billions or how many sacrifices are done? You kill one chicken that you actually eat yourself versus you've killed billions and billions and billions. That one is fine. This one isn't. There's something upside down in the way we're seeing these things. But what's remarkable about what you shared is even that it's remarkable. It's remarkable that it's even remarkable to say I should know the process by which this comes into my mouth. And it really speaks to this disconnection, the fact that I'm even going to film it. Like, that's like saying I'm going to film, I can't even give you an example of something so mundane. I'm going to film me sneezing. It's like, well, who cares, right? Everybody sneezes, but, oh, we've never heard of a sneeze before. We have to document it. You understand? So that even makes the point that we're making here. So again, the connection with earth is severed in the mind of modern woman and man for the most part, as we've just illustrated. Many never see what food looks like before it's harvested and processed, unfamiliar with groundnut plants, but familiar with peanut groundnut. So if you're walking through and I show you these leaves here, you're like, oh, look at those weeds. But then I give you a groundnut, you say, oh, good, there's something to eat. And we can't connect, oh, this weed here, no, that's not a weed, that's the same thing. You just have to dig it up and then see underneath, oh, that's the groundnut that I was looking for. So again, making these connections that we're talking about. And it goes to how much can we actually even recognize in nature. If we get sick, is our first thing to go down and pluck a leaf, or is our first thing to go to the hospital, right? So when we ask ourselves that, that really puts it in perspective of how connected are we or how disconnected are we. Lack of earth consciousness creates a loss of respect for the earth. And I was just looking at this driving this morning as I was coming into school. People were weeding along that road across near TF Hostels. And as they were weeding, you could see all these places that these polythene bags had been thrown, all types of rubbish, garbage had been thrown into the bush. Now, you can picture at one point in the remote past, remote being, let's say, anytime over 100 years ago, it wouldn't have been problematic because everything is biodegradable. So if you're putting something in a corn wrapper for kenkey, you just throw the kenkey in the bush. 1 week later, it's now part of this ecosystem. Right? So life is this cycle. But now you have things that are made out of this plastic that's going to be there, that's going to poison, the environment, so forth and so on. And you're still behaving as though you were in that time before you were dealing with this. And the other day I also saw a guy, he finished drinking, he just threw it on the ground.
Did you say anything?
I was driving past and he was very far away. If I was close by, I, of course, would have said something.
Yeah,
Never fear. Never fear. And I have another brother, he said that there was a Chinese woman who, he saw do that. She threw something on the ground. He was, of course, walking. He said, pick that up. She refused to pick it up. He said, you wouldn't do that in your own country. You can't disrespect my country like that. It became a whole big thing. A Chinese guy came up, and then, he's like, no, you're going to pick it up. You're going to pick it up. And I forget how he said that ended. That's what I remember is that he took them to task about this thing. But again, you have those who are coming from outside not respecting this African soil versus, those who are even right here not respecting it either. And I gave an example in last year's class that when I first came to Africa, it was like this huge thing. I'm coming to Africa. So I get a jar to get some soil so I can put it back on my shrine back in the diaspora because of the reverence for this little bit of soil that's coming from sacred Africa, right? Now picture that versus the view of just, defecate, whatever, who cares? Defecating urination is less of a problem than the plastic because all of those other things are going to be in the cycle. But just this complete disregard and disdain for the soil.
Somebody has started a petition, ban plastic out of Accra, Ghana.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
You saw that that was done in Rwanda to great effect as well, right? And that's,
In Kenya, I believe.
I don't know about Kenya. I'll have to look that up. I know